Again, the 5 things you need to know about working with brokers and distributors before you start.
And by the way, if you've already started working with either one, probably of the group here, it would be a distributor, probably, if anything. All this stuff will still apply because there are some unique things that the way these two industries operate.
Perfect. So number 5. So Steve, what is a distributor?
Good question. So a distributor is a service supplier. They are basically in the business of providing a service to you. And that service, in the case of food distributors, is that they purchase product from you and then resell that product mainly to retailers. And so they're a middleman, but they serve a useful purpose. So specifically, a distributor takes possession, picks up and delivers your product. What does this mean? Well, if you're starting out and you're fairly small, you are probably also your delivery person. So you're also stocking and supplying items to stores or to markets or wherever your product is being sold. Distributor basically takes away that portion of that for you by buying the product from you and then distributing it themselves. The technical aspect of this, however, is that they take possession, meaning they write out a purchase order to you for the amount of product that they think they're going to move within a specified period of time. You agree to have that produced. They come and pick it up with their truck and take it away, and then you wait for the next PO. A distributor on the retail side basically does the physical labor that would otherwise be done by store personnel, meaning that they deliver the product to the store. Sometimes they deliver it to a warehouse, but usually it's to a store. And they will drop it off at that store at a specified place in the back room, or they will actually go and stock, in many cases, go and stock the shelves physically, putting your product in there and making sure that it's there. As a result of that action, for many specialty food items and categories, distributors in many cases actually control a particular section of the store. And when it comes right down to it, and therefore you want that, it's certain retailers that works because, again, the buyer or the category manager does not have to worry about that section of the store. The main thing to remember is distributors move stuff. They are in the logistics business, whether it's food or anything else, logistics.
And then what about brokers? Because I know a lot of people get these two mixed up. It took me forever to figure out these two. So
distributors and brokers are very, very different animals. They are both service suppliers, so they're both providing a service to you. But a broker basically represents your company as a salesperson. So they are going out and trying to get business for you at retailers, at other markets, and they are calling on them for you, as well as a number of other companies, which in the business is called principals. And so they're your salesperson. A broker doesn't deal with product at all, very, very rarely, unless there's like something broken or it's a recall or whatever. They basically don't touch the product. That's not what they're in the business of. They're in the business of selling the product and then coordinating so that product can get put into the stores. Brokers, what else do they do? Brokers provide sales support and communication. So when you start working with a broker will be looking at materials that you have, basically printed materials, maybe videos, whatever the information is in your product, to make the sale easier for the buyer, because they're trying to convince the buyer, obviously, to take your product. Brokers provide a sales force, like on a national basis. So you can, if you are looking at covering national, or if you're looking at covering a particular region of the country, they can provide a sales force. They have the arms and the legs to be able to do that. In the last 20 years, a little bit of that has changed in the fact that there are now retail groups within brokerages, that in fact specifically do physical activities in stores for you. But that's an extra charge, and that's why we say brokers have additional services available to you.
So will you ever work with a broker and a distributor, like working with the same, like a store? Like, so could you be, like if you're at one of the stores, can you have both a broker and a distributor for that store?
Right. In most cases, you'll have both brokers and distributors that you're working with. and they coordinate with each other as best they can, because in fact the broker is responsible for writing the order while the distributor is responsible for getting that amount of product to the particular location where it needs to be. And that's one of the things in what we call broker distributor management that you have to be cognizant of, is that you will have to pay some attention to make sure these people are all working off the same page. And this doesn't affect smaller companies as much as it does larger companies who may be having, let's say, a 4th of July sale, and the stuff really needs to be there that last week in June, and the displays need to be put up, and that requires coordination between their brokers and their distributors. Brokers and distributors are used to working with each other across platforms and stuff. It's not unusual. One will recommend another, possibly. There are both national brokerages and national distributors. So, and then there's also very highly regional brokers and highly regional distributors.
And I always get that confused. So
the broker sells, the distributor moves.
Okay.
That's how we do it.
Number 3 that you need to know is, why do you need them? So what is the reason for having either one of them?
So why do these two entities exist? They're an integral part of the CPG industry, and they basically have grown up for reasons of a business that started out very, very local. All food used to be local. You know, there were literally thousands of grocery chains. There were much more heavy reliance on local product, kind of like what we're going back to today. But as the package industry grew and became more nationalized in basis, 2 things had to happen, and that was one, there had to be an improved set of logistics for getting foods, especially perishables and frozen and whatever, from place to place. And there also had to be a more professional, more efficient sales function. And then really brokers kind of grew out of efficiency. And the reason for that is that you don't necessarily need a full-time salesperson to call on Albertsons, because they're going to see Albertsons once every 3 weeks. What are they going to do the rest of the time? So what the broker does is, in fact, they have people here in town. They have people that call on in stores, but they're going to call on the store for maybe 50 different products in 5 different categories. And so it's an efficiency. That's how it came about. The second way it came about was on the logistics side. Remember, distributors move things. Is the limitation on self-delivery. If every refrigerated or dairy product or whatever is being delivered to a store by the founder of the company, it would be crazy. And so they have to allow for timing, and they have to know how things are going. We can't have everybody just delivering to the store all at once. And so you find that even today in major stores, there are certain hours when certain products are delivered, frozen, bread, other things. So they just don't want everybody coming in the stores themselves. The distributor comes and has a truck, and they have a lot of material in that truck that they can deliver to the store. And on the brokerage side, it provides a sales force without you having to have the overhead of an entire sales force. That overhead, again, is shared by all the different clients, the principals within that brokerage. So from your side, that's great that's the industry history. From your guys' side, how do you benefit from an association with these 2 creatures of the industry? First of all, it's a lot easier to scale with distributors and brokers. We're going to get into the specifics here in a minute, but just imagine that, again, you want to expand, and let's say you want to go into the Portland or Seattle area. You've got production, excuse me, you've got, issues with maybe you only have a certain amount of time at your co-packer or a certain amount of time at the assembly line. Some of you, as we know, have a day job. So you can't be running off to Portland or Seattle. So what happens is that both of these people make it easier for you. The broker makes it easier to call on the accounts. The distributor makes it easier to actually deliver the product. The next aspect that's very important that you will run into is called retailer preference. You need to work with a distributor in many cases at a retailer if you are in a particular category, because that retailer will demand that demand that if you're going to sell to him, the only way you can commit to the store is through a distributor. And he or she, as a buyer, may tell you it has to be this distributor. In that case, you really don't have much of a choice. Generally, you'll be asked if you have distribution within an area if a retailer is interested in taking your product. But it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to go with that retailer. You may have to go with the retailer that go with the distributor that the retailer specifies. And remember, each of them, distributors and brokers, both have an influence on category management within the stores. That's, again, basically due to efficiency. Buyers and category managers at an Albertsons or a Kroger or Fred Meyer are all overworked. And so the smaller the business that's trying to sell in, the less time the buyer actually has to spend with them. And so they leave it to brokers, especially, to basically vet your company, because if the broker's taking you on, it's assumed that you have all your UPC codes, you have all your insurance. If they know you're a real player. Same thing with the distributor. If a distributor has picked you up for distribution, you are not just selling to this one store or trying to sell this one store. You're probably already in 20 or 30 stores already. And so, again, it just makes it easier for everybody. And that's basically why you need them.
So I have a question for you. So, we're here in Boise and Albertsons is here, and they have these 2 new great stores that are out there. And I know a lot of the people that we work with, they are going out there and putting their products into the stores themselves. Is that
right?
Normal around if there's your local store?
No, that's actually abnormal, very abnormal. The basic idea is that in a store where there is an unusual situation where the 2 Albertsons stores, market to street stores, are perfect examples. There are so many more individual items, so many more SKUs, and so many more items created in-house at that store than there is at any other store, that they basically are their own unique logistics system. And in order to make that work, rather than putting a lot of the suppliers into the regular Albertsons system, they basically vetted them, screened them, and then said, okay, guys, you can come in, but you need to basically vendor manage your section so that you're taking care of it, because they don't have time and you're not in the books, you're not in the reorder books, any of those things. And so you have to go through. And there's a lot of times when stores will do halo stores, or they'll try new formats, or little neighborhood stores. Walmart did that when they did little neighborhood stores, is they made the distributors basically drop stuff off at those stores rather than have the Walmart trucks go there, because it was just too much of a pain.
Good, thanks. I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
So number 2 is, so when do I need them, that distributor and that?
So the question is not, do you need them? I mean, you don't absolutely need them if you want to, if you want to stay small. But you will know when you need to have a distributor by when you run out of time. And what that means is as your business grows, you are involved in production, sales, and delivery. At some point in time, you're not going to be able to make that schedule due to the growth that happens. It just simply is going to be impossible. And so that's when it becomes practical to consider using a distributor. Now, you will have to be at a certain level to get a distributor interested in carrying you, because they have minimums like everybody else does. And that's where that's going to go. You'll also need a distributor if the retailer dictates to you that you need to have a distributor. They're not going to let you put you in the system to let you deliver the product to the store. It'll have to come through. And so you've probably heard of UNFI and KE. They may say you need to come in through UNFI, and that's probably because UNFI partially manages that category in the store, and so that's the way you have to come in. The other way that you can get involved with a distributor early on is if you decide from a metro standpoint that you want to sell in a Salt Lake or a Portland or a Los Angeles or Northern California or Texas. If you want to sell out of an area, you're going to need a distributor in that area to basically send larger amounts of product to, for them to then break it down and distribute. So you're not going to want to send anything less than a half a pallet of something to Texas, but Once that gets there, that's got to go to a distributor who then will take it out to the stores. And probably most important is if you don't want to buy a truck. And so, because that's how deliveries, end up taking place. And I have had conversations with clients who are at that point saying, I can get this truck and I can put a wrap on it and I'll have pretty pictures of my product and whatever. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Are you in the trucking business? Because if you don't want to be in the trucking business, don't get started. And again, going back to the retailer dictation, you may be able to do it in your local area, but you will very quickly run out of options as you begin to scale the business, and therefore a distributor becomes better.
So when you get a distributor, if they're into the stores, will they help sell your product at all? Or do they help in that area, like promoting your product?
Right. So there's a long-standing rumor of the fact that distributors help you sell your product and that's not the case. Distributors move product. Brokers sell product. And what happens, though, with a distributor is if they're really excited about your product, and if they have that influence, or in some cases control over that section, they can, in fact, place you in the stores. And that does happen. It doesn't happen in big stores, but it does happen. They can influence that. But they will usually straight out tell you, we're not involved in sales. You as the founder, you as the salesperson for your company need to be involved in doing the sales. We're really in the logistics business. But they can help you. They can also, unfortunately, as a phone call I just got off of prior to the webinar, tells they can also hurt your business if they're not performing correctly. And I know some of you out there have had personal experience with that. It's not pleasant. But you don't expect your broker, or don't expect, your distributor to be a salesperson. That's not going to help the relationship at all.
Okay, and when do you need the broker?
So the broker is the salesperson, but it's pretty much the same circumstances, but for different reasons. When you run out of time, again, if your sales time is being encumbered by your production time, which is going to happen if you continue selling and your product does well, at some point in time, you're going to need someone to be a salesperson. Your first option is probably not to hire a full-time salesperson. You're probably going to hire a broker. You may consider hiring an independent sales rep, which is kind of a standalone broker person. We're not going to talk about that. We do cover it in the course extensively because they are out there. But in general, when you run out of time for sales, you need to be considering a broker. Second time, same situation. If you're trying to sell in Portland or Northern California, if you decide that's a market where your product is going to do well, you probably can't be hustling to those markets to sell. You hire a broker to represent you in those markets. Another place that's a little bit different, and one reason why a broker becomes a really good option, is specialized channels. So I was talking with someone earlier today about going into the gift shop channel. It's different than grocery, it's different than mass or drug, but it is a lucrative channel and will probably be a very good channel for this person's products. But the broker who handles Albertsons doesn't handle gift stores, doesn't handle Bed Bath & Beyond and any of those. So you have to, if you want to get into a specialized channel, then sometimes you look for a broker who specializes in that channel. That's just that simple. And then the last, but not necessarily the least, reason that you need a broker is because you may not be the best salesperson in the world. You might be a great chef. You may have a wonderful, eye for style, but you may not be the best person to sell your product. In general, I think founders starting out are, because they're the people who know the product, they're the people who believe in it. But again, if you've come to the conclusion that that's not your strong suit, you quickly want to align yourself with a broker or an independent sales rep to be able to get that job done.
It kind of reminds me back when we talk about time management, when the 5 biggest mistakes, and the idea that you need to actually start outsourcing something sooner than later. So this is one of those areas that people would outsource sooner than later.
Yeah, I think that there's a horizon And the horizon is basically that you have all these different aspects that we've talked about, and you may be hesitant about them because both of these entities, brokers and distributors, cost you margin. That's just the way the world works. But sooner rather than later, because what that says is you're growing to a point where you need them. If you're going to continue to grow and scale, you will be working with both distributors and brokers. And there's no reason not to get your feet wet right away. I mentioned at the top, for most smaller food companies, most small CPG companies, you will deal with a distributor probably first before you deal with a broker. And that's just a matter of logistics. Logistics comes into play probably a little bit sooner than anything else, unless, again, you've decided you don't want to be your own salesperson, in which case then you may entertain both at the same time. But both entities have minimums for working with them. So you have to be at a certain level before they will even consider working with you. And that's, that varies greatly. Obviously, the larger the size of the brokerage and the larger the size of the distributor, usually the higher the minimums are. Those exceptions would be KeHE and UNFI because of the relationships they have with the retailers. They've agreed to take on some smaller folks without those minimums that they would charge outside.
So if a retailer decides to take someone on and they use a certain distributor, then that distributor will just take that product anyway?
Yeah. So the agreement that basically they have with the retailer is that they will supply their main principles and stuff to the retailer. But if the buyer says, "Hey, I want these new toasted Wheaties, and I want them to come in through you," then the broker will do that, or the distributor will do that for them. Yeah, that's the symbiotic relationship, and that's one of the things which amongst even huge companies, Nabisco's and ConAgra and whatever else, they always have to remember that even though they hire a broker and they choose a distributor, or when they stop choosing distributors and they do direct transportation, is that the broker's main loyalty is actually to the retailers that they sell to. Even though it's the principals who pay them, principals come and go, but retailers are pretty much around forever. So they will work with what the retailer wants to do, and that is the way a lot of people end up with their first distributor, and they're not their broker, but their first distributor, is because a buyer said, "Hey, I'm interested in your product. I want you in 25 stores. You're coming in through KeHE." Okay, I'm done.
So the number one thing people really need to know about working with these two entities is really, how do they get paid? And this is, by the way, so those of you that are listening, this is a little bit of a tricky part on here. It confuses me every time, and I've heard it for years. It's something that we'll go over in detail in the class, but we're going to attempt part of it here. But this is a long conversation.
If you have a piece of paper, now is a good time. Make sure. Okay, so we'll break it down again. Both entities different. How do they get paid? How do distributors get paid? Regardless of the nomenclature of descriptions out there, a distributor works for a margin percentage of your wholesale price. And so once you've established a wholesale and you've established a manufacturer suggested retail price, the distributor will look at your wholesale, and depending upon a couple of factors, they are going to charge you between 18 to 40%, or they're going to take a margin of 18 to 40%. And what that means is, if your wholesale price is $5, all right, and they're going to take a 20% margin, so that's basically that's going to come off the top of the $5. It's all over the place. So that's the second thing, is to understand that there is no, for rounding purposes, for class purposes, we use 30%. Why? Because it's pretty common. Some exciting, disruptive products, new products to the market, not Me Too's, but whatever, fast moving beverages, whatever, may in fact be down on the 20 or less. Some products in dairy are low 20s. But some products that are slower moving, up at the top end, not quite turning as many SKUs, spices, they can be at a 40% margin of the wholesale. And remember, in technical terms, in legal terms, except in cases where they're doing something contractually different, a distributor is purchasing the product legally from you and then reselling it. So your pricing is based upon a wholesale price, and then the distributor says, okay, I'm going to do a 40% margin basically off that wholesale price as my take. The category influences that. Pricing influences where you set your wholesale, influences it. A lot of times if your wholesale is more competitive, they'll give you a break on the percentage because they think you're going to turn faster. And the other thing is geography. The same category in Los Angeles does not sell through distributors the same percentages in New York. But that just is the way things are. So what does that mean exactly? Okay, so the distributor price is wholesale minus his margin. That's the only thing you really have to. It can be. They can talk about it in different ways. There are some distributors who work on what they call a straight line pricing, and that's what they establish. We call it a distributor price. Basically, you have a wholesale price and a distributor price. Your wholesale price remains constant. Your distributor price depends upon which distributor you're working with and what their margin is.
So let me see if I get this right. So if it is a $10 wholesale price, the distributor is going to buy it for if it is 30%, $10 minus $3, so they're going to buy it for $7.
Correct. The distributor price is going to be $7 if your wholesale is 10.
And so they're going to sell it then to the retailer for 10 at the wholesale price. Most likely.
Right. They're going to sell it to the wholesaler at the retail price.
I mean, at the
wholesale
price.
Yeah.
And then the retailer marks it up from there.
The retailer will take the $10 and mark it up to probably $9. So they'll take it up to $18.99. Right.
Okay.
So if we use rules of thumb, the rule of thumb to use if you're trying to figure out your cost of goods is for a normal food distributor, use 30%, and you're going to be pretty safe. You might get lucky and get some that'll do it at 20, but you're going to get other guys that are going to do it at 40. So in the end, you're going to come out okay if you plan for 30. For the retailer, what the retailer calls margin is not really, it's actually markup, but the retailer is going to take that price, and if you generally figure that they're going to close to double it, the wholesale price, they're going to close to double it. So if it comes out, if it's 10 and you're looking at 20 for the retailer shelf price, they're probably going to actually do it at $18.99, but it's going to be pretty close to double. In any of the stuff that there was the current group that you guys are now, you're in that section where that's going to really happen. So that can give you an idea of what your product is going to look like on the shelf. And in fact, with some people, they get to that calculation and they realize that they don't have a viably priced product. And so you need to adjust sizes or cost of goods or whatever to get there. But if that wasn't enough, we also have other fees that come in with distributors. There are setup and handling fees. What does that mean? Well, you're in logistics, you should be. Okay, a setup fee is basically, I've agreed to take you on as a client, but I have to train my people, I have to put you into the system, I have to do inventory, blah, 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 blah. And so there'll be a setup fee. Handling fees there are some distributors who will, basically in a special handling situation, or if they have to go in and reset stores, however that works out, again, there's a charge for that. And then last but not least is chargeback fees. You may have heard horror stories about chargeback fees. Chargeback fees are where the distributor sells the product to the retailer, and for whatever reason, the product doesn't move, or the product gets damaged, or it goes out of code. What the retailer does is they return that to the distributor, and then the distributor has to go pick it up. If it's still, it's still not, if it's still viable, they have to go pick it up, unless there's a reclamation center that the retailer has. But the truth of the matter is that they've got to send a truck out, pick that stuff up, bring it back, and dispose of it. They charge that back to you, all of those costs. So, you can get some real surprises. There was a blog recently where, and I tried to answer the guy as best I could, but he basically said he got a chargeback that was almost 2 years old. And the reason was because the retailer went through an audit and had found out that there had been product that went out of code and was disposed of, and so sent a charge to the distributor, and the distributor sent the charge to its principal and said, here it is. And legally, at least in the state of California, at least, they have 2 years to be able to do that, and they were just shy, of course, of the 2 years. So they, it was due and payable. But anyway, that's chargebacks. You have to be very careful about chargebacks, and especially if you are dealing with a larger retailer. It's a much bigger deal because your order is much bigger. So the percentage of your order that can go out of code and be returned is much bigger. And there are also some retailers who are notorious for, in fact, seeing that the product is not moving as fast as they anticipated and pulling the plug and sending it back.
That's a little scary.
Very scary. Yeah.
But I guess it's part of the risks of doing business.
It's unfortunately part and parcel of the business. Yeah. There is a thing called the guaranteed sale, which there are some categories where guaranteed sale is a where you basically sign up and say that you are guaranteeing that the product will sell a certain amount in a certain time, and that's usually within code. But oftentimes it can be less than code, and that you guarantee the sale. There is also a sell-through policy by the same token, where some foods that are not quite as perishable are sold at maybe perhaps a slightly discounted basis to the wholesale, with the idea that there are no returns on the product. And in that case, the retailer will end up usually donating them to nonprofit organization if it doesn't sell.
So with the distributor then, the distributor actually pays for the product when they pick it up. So that's when their payment is.
Right. So generally what they'll do is you'll sit down when you're working with a distributor and you'll do a planning meeting as to, where the stuff is going. Because of course, distributors are optimistic people like everybody else in the business. They will say, we think we're going to be in 30 stores within a certain period of time, and you will agree based on store activity that you already have. You'll agree that probably a certain amount of product per store is a reasonable amount. And at that point in time, they will look at their calendars to see when they deliver, and they will figure out what the first order is going to be. And unless you're doing what's called a free fill, which is the notorious way the retailer gets the first case of every product for nothing, if there's not a free fill situation, however, they will give you an order. They'll issue a PO for a certain amount by a certain time because they want to come and pick it up at that time. Then you have to hop on the production bandwagon, or with your co-packer, hop on the production wagon, get that stuff ready. They come and pick it up. At that point, they will probably pay that within 30 days. Now, that is the way it was forever until recently. And within the last few years, there's been an amalgamation of activity out there with some distributors, and particularly smaller food products, where they are put on a consignment basis. And again, we're going to talk about that in the course at length, but so they don't give you a PO for it. But the way it usually works is you get the PO, you do the production, they pick it up on the date specified, and that should last for a certain period of time. You and the distributor will talk about that. He will expect to issue a PO to you every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks, whatever it is, probably about at that rate, smaller product. And so you will just get used to that. And you can then begin to judge your sales by whether or not the PO increases or decreases versus the first set, right? So if they order 100 cases the first time around, and then a month later they order 80 cases, well, maybe they overestimated, or you overestimated a little bit on what the product movement would be.
Good detail on that, Steve. There's a lot more to come in the class, because this is one of the really tricky parts on doing
Yes.
retail.
Yeah.
Let's go, oops, over here.
It doesn't want to move.
There we go. What about brokers? Here we go.
How do they get paid? Brokers. Brokers, it's actually a little simpler. Brokers get paid on a commission of your gross wholesale. So regardless of what bargain you've struck with your distributor, broker doesn't care. Broker looks at your wholesale cost, and they're going to take a commission percentage of somewhere between 2 and 15%. Again, why does that vary? It varies all over the place. But with brokerages, it mainly varies because of volume. So if you're not doing a lot of volume, and your product doesn't look like it's going to do a whole lot of volume, you're going to be on the higher end. 10%, 7% to 10% is norm. If I was doing my cost of sales, I would plug in 10% for the broker always. But you may be a little higher, you may be a little lower. 2%. 2% is stuff that's moving really, really well. I have seen with some larger companies that are fast-moving goods, they've been down on the 1.25%, 1.5%, but that's on millions and millions of dollars worth of turns.
And that's under cost of sales, correct?
That's under cost of sales.
Okay.
And right, so not figured in your cost of goods. So, however, what's different on the broker side as well is you are only invoiced for product that has sold. So in other words, it has to sell through at the retailer, or the retailer has to not sell through it. The retailer buys it. When the retailer buys it, that's when, and that's been confirmed, then you will get a usually monthly a bill from the broker for all product that was sold during that month. So that's how it works. Yeah.
So on that part of it then too, so they make the sale, but the product hasn't been delivered yet, and you pay them before you deliver the product that the sale has gone through.
In general, the way it works is that there's a little bit of a lag on the broker side, because what they're doing is they're taking in all of the orders for the month and then putting them together, and so they are generally going to issue you an invoice before that product gets in the store, but not before the retailer has agreed to buy the product.
And then does the retailer pay you directly, or do they pay the
right? The
retailer
still pays you directly.
Okay.
Okay, and so the retailer does not. They facilitate the sale, but the product is sold between you and the retailer, and then they simply send you a commission based on that contract, based on the PO the retailer gives you.
Okay. Good to know. Let's see what else we have here. There's always those additional charges. I feel like, I just flew on Alaskan Airlines, and I loved them. They were great, but I normally fly Southwest, and it's like, you want $60 for a bag? I felt like, those little hidden costs that are in there. It looks like that's what goes on here too.
If your head wasn't spinning already, let's talk about additional charges from brokers. We talked about the fact that they provide some sales support and materials, input for materials and content and all of that. But if we're going to print a bunch of sell sheets, the broker's going to do that. You'll be charged for the printing of those sell sheets. That's just part of the business. So expect that. There are promotional services. Promotional services can be where the retailer the broker figures out that during the year there are certain promotions that will be required of you by the retailer for your category. These will generally be in what we call TPRs, or temporary price reductions. They generally are around 15%, generally. But there are all these things. There are additional things though: displays, coupons, ads, all these other things that you can get involved in. And in trying to make sense of those and what you should do and what you should spend your money on, a broker helps you make those decisions, because they have a lot of category information about. They probably have, another chocolate milk company out there that they're working with, or one on the East Coast, and they know what a coupon does or doesn't do and whatever, and they'll set that up for you. But that has become, in brokerages now, a profit center, so they will charge you for that. Then there's data analysis. So again, years and years ago, Nielsen and IRI, the two companies that provide the syndicated data, The broker has access to that data directly from the retailer. They have a relationship with the retailer where they get that data. They will spin that data, analyze that data, put that data together for you to show you pricing, velocity, all of those things, but they will now charge you for that. That's an extra charge. So that's on top of the commission. And that usually is a yearly and annual contract. It will vary from a few $1,000s to many thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending upon size of the company. But it's all relative to your sales. Just like a distributor, there are startup fees for smaller companies. Why? Because putting you into the system, training their salespeople, all of these things, you share in part of that overhead cost with them when they take you on. And that, by the way, is not true for every brokerage. That is just some brokerages. There are differences in how they operate. But there are, for most of them, minimum service fees. And basically, if a broker and you come to an agreement with a broker, it's going to be based upon a certain amount of volume. Probably in the contract with the broker, there'll be a specified volume that must be made within that period of time, or you will be eligible for minimum service fees. So they will figure that you're going to move X amount of product at 10% commission. And if you don't, the service fee is going to be the difference between whatever you actually did and the 10% they originally figured on when you were coming in. It's crappy, but that's the business. And so if you expect that, you know it going in. Many of these things, by the way, are negotiable. If you are starting doing business with a broker, particularly data analysis is negotiable because they have some big contracts with big principals, and they may be willing to give you some extra information, a little help along the way to get you through if they want you in that brokerage versus you going to someone else.
So again, the 5 things you need to know when working with brokers and distributors. What is a distributor? They are the ones that move the product. What is a broker?
Broker sells the product.
When do I need them?
Now, why do you need them? Why you need them?
Why? Sorry.
Why you need them? Why you need them? Because you can't do it all yourself.
When do you need them?
As soon as you run out of time.
Sooner rather than later. And how do they get paid? It's very complicated.
It's very complicated. But you can figure that out. Another thing which is a difference is the fact that generally, if you are dealing with a broker, most brokers deal with all retailers as opposed to distributors. Some distributors do not work with certain retailers, and certain retailers won't work with certain distributors. That's not true with brokers. Brokers tend to operate with everybody, and a buyer will not usually dictate, or she may say to you, hey, so-and-so is a really good broker if you need one, because they know your category or your particular product need. But in general, they not like with a distributor where a buyer will say, I want you to come in through this distributor. Or open.
So do we have any questions out there? This was a lot of information.
So there were a couple of questions which came in. Yeah, free, and one was, does the distributor store the product for me for free? And answer to the question is, the broker is, in picking up from you and taking delivery of the product, the broker's going to only take what the broker thinks that they're going to be able to put on their trucks that week and move. They're not in the storage business. They don't want to be in the storage business. If they have extra storage space, and particularly if you have like a frozen or refrigerated product, they may negotiate with you to hold a certain amount of product at their facility. So I have a client who's in Northern California, and that is the way that her distributor happens to be actually right next door to the co-packer. And so she was able to negotiate with them for some extra room in there, but that's a totally a side deal. And
what was the other one that came in?
The other one was right. So this is relating to this morning. So the question is do brokers just go out and sell to everybody, or do I have control over it? And the answer is that you have control over it. In your brokerage agreement that you sign, you will specify, it will call out who they are excuse me, allowed to approach and who they are allowed to sell to. Now, in general, by the time you need a broker, you should probably be in 20 to 30 retail outlets all on your own. All right. And there's always the question of what we call the house accounts, which is, do you want to maintain those, and then only allow the broker to call on it? The best way to do that is to figure out that at some day you have to give up the house accounts because you don't want to be dealing with them. And the broker wants those. That's part of the reason they want to do business with you, is because you've already done something to establish yourself out there. And they see that as part of the startup costs and moving with it. So, but in the brokerage agreement, and you can amend that brokerage agreement anytime. And the way that usually happens is that the broker will come to you and say, we have good contacts at Ray's in Louisiana. And can we call on Ray's? Can we represent you at Ray's? And then you can say, oh yeah, absolutely. If you have specialized product and you are dealing on a large regional basis, like let's say west of the Rockies, you are probably going to be dealing with 2 or 3 brokers and 2 or 3 distributors in order to cover that territory, because you're going to be probably starting out with a brokerage that's not national in scope because you wouldn't meet the minimums. So you're probably going to have a broker in Portland, a broker in Seattle, and a broker in Salt Lake City. You can, again, if you're dealing with Albertsons and you're here, you can say, well, I don't want you calling on Albertsons. That probably would disincentivize the broker to such a point that they probably wouldn't take your business, but you can do that. So you can maintain house accounts if you want, but generally you give those up and you are always in control of that. And you are in control of your wholesale price. You can maintain that. There is, that there's no problem with that. Once the product is sold, either to a distributor or to a retailer, you lose that control. They can charge whatever they want for it. It doesn't matter. And there are sometimes surprises when you walk into a store and you see your product and it's like, it's supposed to be $9.99 and it's $12.99. And it's like, what? But you have no control over that. That the product is gone, and you just expect that it's going to happen every once in a while.
Any other questions out there?
It says we're recording. That's good.
Okay. Nope, I think we're good.